Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Fresh Friday. Thank you so much for joining back in. Your support means everything and lets me continue to make these videos, so thank you. This week, we are doing the acorn squash. This is kind of a combination of a butternut squash in its creaminess, but also a spaghetti squash in that when you pull it, it almost looks like spaghetti the same way, but it doesn't quite have the texture that spaghetti squash has where it can be a substitute for spaghetti. So we are going to roast this the same way that we have been doing the past couple weeks. I'm sure everyone can do this in their sleep at this point. It's really easy. We are making an acorn squash soup that is served in acorn squash bowls. Now it sounds really difficult. It looks way more impressive than it actually takes in effort. And it's just going to be roasted with the other acorn halves, the bowls are. So it's very easy. It looks very impressive and I'm excited. But let me tell you a little bit about where I got the acorn squash. So I went out to Richmond to the Baldwin Farm, and it was up this little mountainside, and it was just very quaint and really beautiful. And they had so many different animals that you could pet. All the kids were really excited because there was feed out, and there were baby goats that were minuscule. I mean, they were so tiny and adorable. And there were bunnies, and there was a cow, and there were just so many things that you could do or see there. And it was really beautiful because it was very much in the countryside. I mean, you could see the rolling hills. Everything was still green on the grass, but all of the leaves had turned, and it was just really nice. And you can actually just walk right out to the pumpkin patch and pick your pumpkin, and there are still so many, and they are really beautiful pumpkins. I mean, really, none of them seemed blemished. They were all quite large. It was really nice, but if picking them isn't your thing, there were already some picked up at the front. There were jams and jellies you could get. Everyone was so nice. There's just so many things to do, and you could really make a day out of going there with your kids or a significant other, or even just by yourself, like me. It was just really beautiful, and since we are having this very weird warm spell, which I think is probably going to be one of the last warm spells, definitely get out there this weekend. Get out there before it rains more and we lose all the leaves, and go enjoy it because it is really, really lovely. But let's get into making this acorn squash soup.
To get this recipe started, we are going to start with our acorn squash. So I have 2 of our squashes here, and we're just going to break these down the exact way we've been doing it the past couple weeks. We're going to take a heavy and sharp knife and just be patient and watch our fingers as we break through them in the middle. And then once you finally get those cracked open, we are going to take a spoon and scoop out all of the seeds. And like we've been doing the past couple weeks, we are going to give these a nice little coating of olive oil and a big pinch of salt and pepper. I placed those 2 acorn squash on a parchment-lined baking sheet ready for the oven. And with the other 2, we are making bowls. So you are going to slice barely on the bottom, just enough so that it can stand up. You don't want to get too much of the flesh to where if you poke it, it will come through. And then across the top, you're just going to cut off the little hat. You can make this as big or small as you would like, but just keep in mind that you are just using this as a topper at the end. Once those are ready to go, we're going to scoop out the seeds, and make sure you just don't go through the bottom because keep in mind where you're putting soup in this and you don't want that to come through. And once you have all of that scooped out, we're going to give it another coating of olive oil and a big pinch of salt and pepper. These will go on the baking sheet with the other acorn squash at 400 for about 50 minutes. You just want to be able to get your fork through and have a soft squash, but be careful not to poke the bottom of the bowls. Next, we're going to do a lot of rough chopping, and by rough, I really mean rough. Do not pay attention to mine. It's all getting blended up, so it doesn't really matter. You just want pieces around the same size. So I took my 6 celery stalks, and I made sure to get the ends off, and then if I had to, I would go down the center and then just start chopping them. This is obviously a very sped up version. I wish it was this fast with chopping, but this is the most intensive part, so just be patient with it. And once you get your celery done, you are going to do 6 carrots. So I made sure to already have used my carrot peeler on these because mine were a little bit dirty. And then I didn't see the need to cut these anymore unless I had a really big carrot. I would cut that down the middle just like I did with the celery, but I just gave these a nice rough chop. And some of you may have guessed it, but we're making a mirepoix, which means the celery, the carrot, and the onion are making a sweet, lovely harmony together. And so we are going to be cutting up our sweet yellow onion. This is once again another very, very, very rough chop. Do not judge me for this. I did not do this the classic way of pulling it to my cutting board and making the 3 slices. I just kind of gave this a rough chop mince just so that I can get this in the pan and we can get the soup started. A lot of grocery stores will sell a mirepoix mix in their freezer section or the refrigerator area near the produce. This is really nice for if you don't have the time to do all of this chopping, but at the same time you will be paying a lot more than you would if you were to just get an onion, some carrots, and celery. So it's really just up to how much time you have or how much you are wanting to spend, but it is a nice little shortcut. Next up, we are cubing some sweet potatoes, so make sure you gave these a good scrub before you start your cubing. But also, I got these in my CSA box. You might have seen the post on our Facebook or Instagram where I talk a little bit about that. And if you have any questions about CSA boxes or what a CSA is, you can shoot us a DM or a message and we would be happy to talk to you about it. I've been really happy with what I got this first week and I can't wait to share more with you all. But yes, we are going to be cubing these and just try and get them around the same size as much as possible. As you can see, I had some pretty big sweet potato chunks, so I just tried to keep an eye out for that. If you don't catch all of them, it's totally fine. It's all gonna steam together in the broth, but just try and catch those and make a little bit smaller pieces. Next, you're going to take 5 cloves of garlic and give them a little smash to get all of the papery bits off. And if you're like me, you might have some little sprouts in them. That just means your garlic is a little bit older. It won't really affect the taste, but I was always taught to take those out, so that's what I'm doing here. But then you're going to give them a nice little smash after that and a little mince, and you're just trying to break them down a little bit before putting them in the soup. Our garlic is going to be hanging out on the cutting board for a little bit, which is actually really good because it transforms the allicin that's in it into anti-cancer compounds. So when you have the opportunity to let your garlic sit for about 10 to 15 minutes before using it, that is actually best, and that is how you get the most benefit from it. Following the garlic, I took a 2-inch knob of fresh ginger, and using the peeler, I just softly got the skin off of that and then gave it a nice chop/mince. On to the soup. So I have my Dutch oven here and I have about 2 tablespoons of olive oil in it. I don't usually measure that, I kind of just eyeball it, but you want the oil to be a bit warm before you put in your vegetables. We are going to start with our onion, and you're going to cook that on medium heat for about 5 minutes until it gets translucent. If you are like me and mixed in your mirepoix, it's okay if a few carrots or things like that get in there. That is totally fine. You just want to get most of your onions in and softened before you add in the rest of your vegetables. Once those start to get a little bit translucent and soft, you are going to add in your celery, your carrots, and your sweet potatoes. And you're going to give this a really good mix. You want to make sure the onion is mixed in, and then you're going to cover it and you're going to let it cook for 15 minutes, but make sure that you still check on it and give it a stir every once in a while. After those 15 minutes, you are going to add in your fresh garlic and fresh ginger and give that a stir. Let it cook for about a minute, and then you're going to add in your cauliflower. So you can do florets for this, but I happen to have cauliflower rice in my freezer that I needed to use, and so I just added that in and gave it a good mix. Arguably one of the most important parts, we are going to give this a big pinch of salt and a big pinch of pepper, and then also I had some fresh sage leaves. I did about 5 to 8, and I gave those a nice little chiffonade cut, and so I'm going to add those in just to infuse more flavor. At this point, we are going to add in our stock. So I used veggie stock. You can use water or chicken broth or really anything that you have, but I just like using this to infuse extra flavor. We are going to bring this to a boil, and then we are going to cover it and reduce it to a simmer and let it cook for 15 minutes. In the meantime, we have taken the squash out of the oven and let it cool a little bit before taking the peel off and cutting it up a little bit. We're going to add the squash pieces into the soup now, and we're going to cook it another 15 minutes with the top on. At this point, I like to turn off the stove and start to let this cool. I'm going to ladle some of this into a few of the bowls that I used for prep, just so that this can cool down a little bit faster. You could technically put this in the blender right now, but it would be steaming hot and a little bit dangerous, so just let it cool a little bit to be careful. Once everything is cooled, you can use an immersion blender, a regular blender, or a food processor to blend it up. I think you get the smoothest soup by using a regular blender, so that's what I did. And then I popped it right back into the Dutch oven that I used to cook it down in. With my heat on low, I added in about half a cup of half and half to this to add a little cream and gave it a taste for salt and pepper. Once the soup is to your liking, you are going to take your wonderful squash bowls. I added a little bit of Parmesan cheese to the bottom of mine, and then you're going to ladle some soup into it and get onto the toppings. I topped mine with a little bit more Parmesan cheese, some coarsely ground black pepper, and then some pepita seeds. This is oh so delicious. I hope you guys give this a try. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next week.